Hey guys, it's Thermal Grease Monkey here, and I'm back once again with another video. In this video, I want to go back to the X99 platform. I said in a previous video I wanted to take one of my X99 CPUs and pair it with a more modern, higher-end GPU to see, can it still keep up? Is it still a phenomenal option? Or do you need something better to get all of the performance out of these nicer cards? So I decided to pick the i7-1600K. I decided to go with a 6-core, 12-thread processor you could get at a very moderate price. I feel like it represents the Haswell and Broadwell 6-core chips quite well, and I decided that this would be a good budget option to kick things off with. And I ended up getting to borrow two graphics cards, an RX 6800 and 6800 XT, to do a little bit of testing to see if we have any bottlenecks or if the 6800K is good enough to handle these higher end cards. Now, we did run things at stock speeds. The 6800K is running at its stock clock speeds, and the RAM is clocked at 2400 megahertz. So to preface this ahead of time, you might be able to get a little bit more performance if you do a little bit of overclocking and of your CPU and your RAM. You can definitely get a little bit more performance, anywhere from like 10 to 20% more performance, which I would definitely recommend after watching this video. Now, we're going to test 4 different games. We're going to test CS2, we're going to test Black Ops 6, we're going to test Forza Horizon 5, and to finish things off with Marvel Rivals. Now, getting straight into it, we'll start off with CS2. CS2, immediately we can tell there's a bottleneck. Even at 1440p, these graphics cards should be getting more FPS. You can see here, averaging very high all the way down to low. At very high, we're at 154 FPS on our averages, and at low, we're at 185. Again, these are playable, but for the graphics card you have, you should be getting way more performance, and we definitely see a CPU bottleneck here. And for the 6800 XT, better by a few FPS, but the CPU is definitely the bottleneck here. The 6800 XT should have significantly more performance, and it's just not. Moving over to Black Ops 6, we find ourselves again in the same scenario. Now, at extreme settings, we do find that our averages are about where they should be. We get GPU averages, and you get the CPU simulation of where it should be at. You can see where your bottleneck is and where your GPU should be at, and you can see where a bottleneck might be occurring. At extreme, we don't really experience that on either the 6800 or 6800 XT. Kicking it off though with our 6800 numbers though, at extreme we're averaging about 84 FPS. That's a solid job at 1440p with everything cranked. You know, I expect it to be very demanding on the GPU. Once we move down to Ultra though, it moves to 87 FPS, where we actually should be getting more. The numbers are saying we should be getting about 95 FPS instead of 87. So a little bit of a bottleneck, but nothing too bad. Once we get to balance though, that's where things start to hit the fan a little bit. We're averaging about 103 FPS on balanced, and it says we should be getting about 119 FPS. Definitely a bottleneck there. At basic, we're averaging 113 FPS, and we should be finding ourselves at 143 FPS. And at minimum, we're at 114 FPS, and we should be finding ourselves at 204 FPS. Now again, I don't know if it is actually that high that the graphics card can go at minimum settings, but we're definitely having a massive bottleneck here. When you're having basic and minimum graphic settings right next to each other, that's definitely a CPU bottleneck there for you. Moving over to the 1600 XT, it's more the same, just with higher FPS. At extreme, we're averaging 90 FPS, and it's saying roughly where we should be at. At ultra though, it says 92 on average, and we should be getting 102. At balanced, we're averaging 104, and we should be getting 137. At basic, we're averaging 115, and we should be getting 151. And at minimum, we're averaging 115 again, although with a couple FPS higher, 5% and 1% lows. But it says our average should be 249 FPS. That is a massive bottleneck for this stuff. Now, once again, we are having stuff clocked at the stock speeds for the CPU, and the RAM is at 2400 megahertz. So if you do some overclocking to your CPU and your RAM, you do have performance on the table, 10 to 20 FPS 10 to 20% more performance is available if you do a little bit of overclocking with these components. There is room on the table to fix some of this, but it is not having a good showing overall. When we move over to Forza Horizon 5 for our third game, more of the same stuff. At Extreme and Ultra 8x MSA, we're about on par where we need to be. A slight deviation of maybe an FPS or two, but our averages are pretty good. With the 6800, we're averaging about 82, and at Ultra, we're at 94 with our RX 6800, and that's about on par where they should be. At high, though, with 4x MSA, that's where we start to see a big difference. We're averaging about 126 FPS, and we should be getting 142. At 2x MSA, at medium settings, we're averaging 129, should be getting 160. At low, we're averaging 140 FPS, when we should be getting 172. And at very low, we're averaging 168, and we should be getting 204. And when we move over to the 6800 XT, more of the same. We're averaging at the 8x MSA and Ultra 8x MSA, we're pretty close to our numbers. We're averaging about 91 at Extreme, and at Ultra, we're 103. The averages said it should be 92 and 105, but a slight deviation of an FPS or two, not a big deal. But when we move to high with 4x MSA, that's when all hell breaks loose once again. 132 for our averages, and 154 is where we should be at. At 2x MSA at medium with the 1600 XT, we averaged 133 FPS, and we should be at 171. At low with no MSA turned on, we averaged 144 FPS. We should be at 186. And at very low, we averaged 165, and we should be getting 219. When we're having a 50 to 60 FPS difference in our averages for what we should be getting, that is a massive bottleneck. That is crazy numbers for a bottleneck. So again, playable, but definitely a little bit disappointing when you are expecting a little bit more performance. And to wrap things up, right? Moving over to Marvel Rivals to wrap things up here. We'll start with the 6800. At Ultra, we're averaging 55 FPS with the 49 for the 1% lows. At high, 78 with 72 for the 1% lows. Medium, we're averaging 93 with 79 for the 1% lows. And at low, we're at 108 with 98 FPS for the 1% lows. And at the 6800 XT, we're averaging 75 FPS with 56 for the 1% lows. At high, we're at 91 with 72 for the 1% lows. Medium, 112 with 84 for our 1% lows. And at low, we're at 126 with 93 FPS for our 1% lows. I am expecting a little bit more from this game. Now, I don't know if some of our metrics here are from a certain map. Maybe some of it is Marvel Rivals. Maybe some of it's the CPU. It could be a mix of many things. But I personally, even at 1440p, with the graphics cards we have, I was expecting a lot more performance. So there could be a couple of factors going on here, but you can still tell we have a bottleneck going on. And kind of wrapping things up here, right? I don't think the 6800K had a bad showing. I think if you do some overclocking with the CPU and the RAM, it fixes a lot of problems. Getting 10 to 20% more FPS is a big deal, especially in a lot of these shooters and stuff. But overall, getting a newer CPU makes more sense, right? Finding yourself a Zen 3 Ryzen CPU, pairing it with one of these, you'll have tons of performance. And why would you want to leave some of your GPU's performance on the table? Now, there are certain use cases where I think it still can make some sense. If you have one of these CPUs and you have an older GPU and you decide to pair it with a GPU of this caliber roughly, I think it can still make sense. If you're somebody who's trying to play at 1440p, 4K, and you're just trying to crank the graphics settings, you want everything turned on, and you're looking for a between 60 to probably 100 FPS, I'd say even 120 FPS. If that's kind of your range, what you want for performance, these cards can do that. If you're trying to play like single player narrative games, something with a lot of visuals, open world, where FPS doesn't quite matter as much, then yeah, I would say it. But if you're trying to be competitive, this is not the way to go. You need a better CPU to pair with a GPU of this caliber. You need something newer that is more capable of pushing more frames. but I think there is some sense in pairing some of these older but more powerful CPUs with these GPUs, but it's not in competitive titles for sure. So overall, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys are enjoying my content, you guys could hit that subscribe button and hit that bell icon so you guys are getting notifications when my videos are going up. If you guys like the video, hit that like button. If you didn't, feel free to hit the dislike button. Totally understand. And if you guys could give me some feedback, what you thought about the video, as well as some other video ideas. I have seen some different video ideas. I plan on testing some older, more obsolete tech to see if you can still play on computer components from like 15 to 20 years ago. And I also had some suggestions about maybe testing some really older cards that are about a decade old, maybe doing SLI stuff. I had a few different suggestions in my comments, so I'm going to do a little bit of research and see if I can make some of those videos for you guys. And I do have some more fun upcoming videos planned out for you guys as well. So if you guys want to see some more of that, once again, hit that subscribe button and keep an eye out for my videos. And have a great week, guys. I'll see you guys next time. Later.